way to address the unicast thing is there are CDNs that actually use anycast addresses. So anycast simply means that you use an IP address that's in a prefix that's announced from multiple different locations. So normally you would think of an AS announcing a range of prefixes that belong in one region of the internet. But that's not how you have to do things. So you could be a content delivery network that is connected to a bunch of different networks at different locations. There's no reason that you can't announce that same prefix from every single one of those locations. And if you've done that, and if we look at this as this is an actual hierarchy, so horizontal line means a peer-to-peer relationship, and this up here means from customer to provider. This is a customer, this is a provider. So if you look at this as a sort of traditional hierarchy of business relationships, what we would find is, for example, who would, so let's say that you're given the same IP address, 120.10.0.1. That's the anycast address that you use for your service. And you have a server listening in this in this part of the network, and another one top over there. So if you are a client in AS1, which anycast server would you be sent to? Would you be sent to the bottom left or to the top one? Bottom left, right, exactly. So the reason here is this is a peering link. It's advantageous for this AS to use the no-cost link. There's no reason, even though it will get an announcement from all the way up that chain, it has no reason to go over a provider link. Okay, how about AS3? Who's it going to go to? Bottom or top? So you go to the top, exactly. So the only compliant path, valley-free path, is to go up. And then so you go via AS41. And then what would happen with AS2? We go to the bottom one or the top one? I mean, a little bit of both. So I guess it kind of depends on what gets exported to it. But in this case, what would probably happen, so basically, the question is, the answer is it depends. I've drawn it like this, which is one possibility. In this case, this is probably actually less preferred than going down here, because if it goes down here, it makes money. Oh, sorry, no, it can't go down here, because this is a valley. So you can't go up and then down and then horizontal. That's a valley. So this actually is not going to happen, because AS1 would not export this path to its provider. So the only option is for AS2 to go up there. So you see what's happening. Everybody will find a valid path to that anycast address. DNS has not been involved at all. You're just using IP addresses and using BGP routing. Now, is this going to give you the best performance? Can you guarantee that it would give you the best performance? I'm hearing some no's. And I'm guessing that the reason you're thinking of this is because we're using the best BGP path, which is not necessarily the best performing path. So an advantage here is that I guess at least you don't have to worry about DNS mappings anymore. Just let the internet route the traffic. You're still geo-replicated. And some notion of a good path is being selected. It's just not necessarily going to give you the best performance. So the disadvantage, again, going back to stateful services, with DNS, you actually get one IP address, which in that case, you could support something stateful. With anycast, you can't necessarily provide those guarantees. Although, again, routers are probably not going to change that much. Okay, so that's anycasting. Edgecast, if I remember correctly, actually uses anycasting for the most part. They're not Edgecast, Limelight. So they tend to deliver more video, so latency doesn't matter as much to them. They just, I guess, want relatively cheap but fast paths, and BGP paths seem to be good enough for that. Okay, so that's any testing. But let's talk about really the meat of what you guys have to implement for Project 5. I know this is a little weird, I mean, when you just start Project 4, but you can kind of file this away as a lecture to revisit when Project 5 comes out. So the key goal with optimizing performance is send clients to the server with the best ending performance, and that depends generally on 3 things. How loaded are the servers? Is the content at the server that you're sending the client to? And then what are the network conditions between the client and the server? So we talked about optimizing for server load. You can do load balancing and monitoring. This is generally not a hard problem. So we're not going to focus on this. We're going to ignore server load. The content and network conditions are important problems and interesting ones. So before, I talked about a ZIF log. Let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So the question here is, where should you put content in the network, given that each replica has a fixed amount of space, a finite amount of space that you can use to store content? And there's more content in the world than you could fit on any one server. So the key answer to this question is to look at the popularity of content. So you can't cache everything, which means instead you should try to optimize for some other metric. And that metric might be try to maximize the fraction of time that a requested object is located on the server that a client is visiting. You guys see the difference between optimizing for that versus trying to optimize for having every individual piece of content? Maybe, maybe not. So the idea here is, sort of the key insight is people have done studies to look at how popular different objects are. And it's almost always the case, if this is a human-driven system, that there is a power law, or called ZIF-like distribution, or it's also called heavy tail. And I've drawn an example of this, where what I've shown here is the number of unique visitors on the y-axis. Notice this is log scale. And on the x-axis is the rank of the site. So basically, the most popular site is here, the least popular site is to the right. So they're just ordered. Think of it as the most popular site gets number 1, second most popular gets 2, and the nth most popular site gets n. And that's the number on the x-axis. So what the power law generally means is that the popularity of something for a given site, in this case at a given rank, R, is more or less proportional to 1 over the rank. So essentially what this property is that there's a small number of sites that get most of the requests. If you're thinking about content, there's essentially a small fraction of content that most people visit, and then the less and less popular content gets much less popular very quickly. So for this to be the case, the way you test for it is you plot a distribution like this on a log-log scale, and if it's linear on a log-log scale, that tells you that it's heavy tail. Well, it's likely heavy tail. It's not the only test that you have, but it's a good test. So basically, if something is not heavy tail, if in fact it has a sort of lighter tail to it, so it drops off, it doesn't drop off so fast. If it's like exponential, it's another example. What happens is when you plot it on a log-log scale, you don't get something linear. It doesn't fit a nice straight line. So all of this is to say, we have something we can take advantage of here. That most sites that people visit have a power law property, have a ZIF-like feature. So if you are managing a cache on a replica, maybe you guys can tell me which objects should you cache, given you can't fit everything into cache. What's going to give you the best hit rate? What's that? Most recently used. Why would most recently used be good?
Because you said most of the traffic goes only to a small portion of the object, and that object has has very high heat. A lot of heat goes to those objects, and cache those objects, so that will generate very high priority.
So what if you only keep 10 objects in your cache? And let's say that somebody just accessed the 100th most popular thing. The most recently used says, I'm going to keep that thing in my cache. And I'm going to throw out something that was less recently used. Is that the optimal thing to do here? Maybe not. So what might you want to do instead? Most frequently used. Yes. So most frequently used is a direct measure of that popularity. So over time, you learn what's accessed the most, and you just cache the stuff that's accessed the most. And you may get some requests for things towards that tail, towards the right-hand side of the x-axis. You don't cache those, because it doesn't matter, because it's unlikely they're going to be asked for again. So unlike most recently used, if you use most frequently used, you're always going to keep the heavy hitters in cache. You're going to maximize your hit rate. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. If you know what the request distribution is, you in fact can optimize for that given request distribution, assuming it's stable enough over time. This will come up in project 5. Any questions on this aspect so far? I've thrown a lot of like crazy terminology at you, like zip and distributions and stuff like that.
If you use the most frequently used object, that would be very hard. You don't have to take the frequency of each of that.
It's true, you would have to keep the frequency of each of the objects, and that has some overhead.
Yeah, and then you have to leave the object with very low frequency, and then maybe sorting also.
Right. I think it's still, for the most case, remember these objects are, say, kilobytes in size, and storing a number, like say a 32-bit number. That's just one byte. I think the overhead's reasonably small compared to the total amount of content. But you're right, there's some amount of overhead. I'd say it's much less than 1%. There is an issue of expiring frequency over time. There's solutions to that as well. But for project 5, I'm not going to have you guys care about that. We're going to give you a static distribution of requests. Any other questions on this stuff?